Welcome to the Project Censored show on Pacifica Radio. I'm your host, Mickey Huff. Today on the program, we are honored to welcome back to the show, Abby Martin. Abby Martin is likely no stranger to our audience. Abby is an independent anti-imperialist journalist, host of the Empire Files and Media Roots Radio. She's also a filmmaker of Gaza Fights for Freedom and the forthcoming Earth's Greatest Enemy. Perhaps we'll get into some of that later in our conversation, but we'll certainly be dedicating an entire segment to that new film when it comes out earlier next year. Abby Martin, welcome back to the Project Censored show.
It's great to be on. Thank you so much for having me, Mickey.
It's always a pleasure to catch up with you, and you're always doing so much in the area of independent journalism and around anti-imperialist initiatives and efforts. And of course, your film Gaza Fights for Freedom is very, very much addressing a topic that's on a lot of people's minds right now. I might preface the rest of this by suggesting that had more people seen your film and had more people been familiar with the very history of these struggles, we could be in a very different place than we are right now. And perhaps Palestinian people could be in a better place. But a big part of that challenge has been Western propaganda, certainly unilateral support for right-wing Israeli policies that's been going back for decades. Abby, you have a lot of connections to the topic. And of course, your film, Gaza Fights for Freedom, you worked with people that live there, that are there. And one of the distinct differences between the kind of journalism you do is that you really do grassroots journalism, literally talking to people who are in the middle of the they're experiencing the very things that they're talking about and describing. They're not, in this case, they're not on NPR at some Tony Hotel in Jerusalem, phoning in and talking about whatever's happening when they actually have no idea what's happening with real people on the ground in places like Gaza. So Abby Martin, maybe you can share with us a little bit of the information you have and about the people that you know and some about this horrible tragedy as it continues to unfold.
Yes, Mickey. So Gaza Fights for Freedom, for those who haven't seen it, I definitely recommend everyone check it out. GazaFightsForFreedom.com. It's available in tons of different languages for free to watch. It provides essential, crucial context to what is happening right now, because of course, both of us know history did not start on October 7th. There's a lot of crucial context, and no, it's not complicated. It's not an age-old battle over religion, and it's not a war between two equal entities. It's actually Israel waging a war against a people that they are imprisoning. It's fascinating the way that the Western media has interpreted this and analyzed it. Gaza is a place that consists of refugees largely that are forbidden to travel from their own ancestral lands that are right across this fortified border fence that Israeli authorities have authorized themselves to shoot to kill if you wander too close to the fence. They control what goes in and out. And that is why you saw Israeli ministers say, now we're going to turn this 17-year illegal blockade, where they already only allow a certain amount of fuel, water, and food to go in day to day. Now they're going to have a complete siege of Gaza because, quote, they are human animals and we need to act accordingly, end quote. So you see a lot of genocidal intent, a lot of genocidal, explicit genocidal rhetoric laid bare. But you'll see a lot of placating from American politicians pretending like this is not exactly what Israeli officials have clearly laid it out to be. And when you juxtapose that with the actual actions, bombing densely populated areas where they know massive amount of civilians are, when Hamas is actually underground in the tunnel system. And so they're bombing hospitals, mosques, refugee camps, shelters, and schools in a completely barbaric way, strategically to create a second Nakba, where they want to terrorize everyone into fleeing and just expel everyone out of Gaza so they can recolonize it. That is the reality of what's happening. In Gaza Fights for Freedom, we saw what happens when Palestinians peacefully protest their imprisonment. And we saw tens of thousands of people going to that artificial border fence, and they were mowed down by Israeli snipers by the thousands. Over 213 Palestinians lost their lives throughout those several months of the Great March of Return. They were targeting disabled people, children, medics, and journalists. And this is just the playbook with Israel. I mean, people don't understand how, a sniper can put a child in their crosshairs and pull the trigger. Well, this is what happens when you completely dehumanize a population that you are subjugating your entire life. I mean, this propaganda goes from birth until death. My friends and colleagues who are on the ground in Gaza, who cannot leave, all of whom, who've worked on the documentary, it's harrowing what's happening to them, Mickey. I mean, one of them, one of them wants to remain anonymous. And that's why I'm putting up his texts and messages to me anonymously, because as we know, Israeli authorities are literally targeting and assassinating journalists alongside their entire families. That is what's happening right now. Over 50, actually over 60
wow,
have been assassinated. And their
that number's nearly doubled in a week.
It is unfathomable that the entire journalistic community of the world is not standing together in complete horror, speaking out against Israel. It's either passive voice, or people are too cowardly, or there's somehow a deep-seated denial that this is actually happening, that the occupied territories are actually the most dangerous place in the world to be a journalist operating. And the fact that the entire world journalistic community is not completely outraged says a lot.
And aren't we seeing both sides in here? We know this. We've been trying to approach this, of course, with a critical media literacy lens. And when we're talking about this and some of the things that we put out at the project, we're focusing a little bit more on the means by which the messages are framed and shaped, right? And that's so significant and important here. But even when we're trying to focus on media, we can't get away from, well, if you say anything that's remotely critical about the Israeli government, you slide into that weird anti-Semitic trap, right? That these folks won't let you get out of, number one. And two, folks will really quickly shoot back and say, well, you didn't say anything about the 4 journalists that were killed, Israeli journalists that are killed. And, so it gets into that both sides journalism, where it starts to turn into like, well, what about, and well, this side does it, and they did this, and you didn't say that. And I mean, at the core of this, and you said this earlier, but this is why I'm kind of going back to this. When you set this up, you were saying this is not really a war. It's not really a conflict in this way. It's a completely unbalanced assault on people that have really no means by which to do much about it or even go elsewhere.
No, exactly. I mean, these people are in a cage. Hamas has no air force. They have no military vehicles. They don't have an official army with high-tech weaponry. So when you're talking about a war, it's cartoonish to actually depict what Israel is doing as a war. Israel's just carpet bombing and flattening a 25-mile strip of land with 1 million children living in it. I mean, with high-tech weaponry that the US government is giving them. Hellfire missiles in the thousands that they are knowingly dropping on massive apartment structures that are full of kids. It's crazy, Mickey. And what my friends are telling me, this is absolutely insane. So Ahmed Artema, who was one of the lead organizers of the Great March of Return, Israel has a complete database of everyone who lives in Gaza. They have spies on the ground. They know infrastructurally what every building is. That's why they target what they claim to be Hamas targets, right? And that's what they tell us when it's really not. It's really just civilian infrastructure or press offices or whatever they deem as, Hamas affiliates, which is really anything that's infrastructurally government services within Gaza. My friend Ahmed Artema, his house was targeted and bombed. His 10-year-old child was murdered. And he's sitting in the hospital with 2nd-degree burns with his other 2 kids. That's the Palestinian Gandhi. Where are the nonviolent Palestinian protesters? Well, you're systematically murdering them, as well as all the journalists, because you don't want the truth to be told. And then when you see the other 2 videographers who worked on the film, they're both rendered homeless. One of them's 2 brothers were murdered, and they have nowhere else to go. They're just aimlessly wandering around, and Israeli snipers are perched up everywhere, shooting people who try to go back to the north. So it is the most disproportionate, lopsided reality that we are being told. And the uniformity of the Western press to act as stenographers, despite the horrors that we are addressing, despite the targeted assassinations of journalists, despite the fact that more UN workers have been killed than Hamas commanders. What does that tell you about the reality of the situation and this passive voice that's used by the media? They're just dropping dead. Let's get into dropping dead.
Right. Yes. And young people versus children. Some people just seem to die for no reason. Others are killed. Like the language and the framing of it is very intentional. So maybe talk a little bit more about that, because past here is prologue. The idea that, the notion people can maybe have a hard time wrapping their heads around, like they're targeting journalists, you just said, right? True story. Many of them. And now almost indiscriminately, like on purpose, but like their whole families. I can't help but think of Shireen Abu Akleh, a victim of the IDF last year, 25-year veteran of Al Jazeera, American Palestinian, right? A Palestinian American reporter was targeted specifically and assassinated. So, I mean, again, past is prologue. I mean, I get that the fog of war and the Hamas attack of October 7 has sort of riled up the masses. But this kind of stuff has been going on for a long, long time. It's deliberate. It's targeted. I mean, the fact that they haven't killed 15,000 Palestinians in 8 weeks, as a matter of course, every 8 weeks, it doesn't change the fact that these policies have been in place for a long time. Whether it's the Hannibal Directive or the idea of shooting at journalists or targeting children. I mean,
they're a completely rogue state. I mean, that's the thing. It's like you can talk about anti-Semitism all day, but it doesn't really ring true anymore. It will never ring true. That was just the playbook to try to deflect and put everyone on the defense who are like anti-racists and anti-bigots, especially
there
people
are real anti-Semites. And by the way, Palestinians
of course,
are
there's real anti-Semites. Yeah. Of course.
And this takes away from the focus, right? I mean, this is blaming the wrong people.
To paint all Palestine solidarity demonstrators and activists and concerned citizens with a broad brush as anti-Semites, for the longest time, it made everyone shut up and be on the defense and say, "Oh, no, I actually care about justice and human rights." And it doesn't really stick anymore, Mickey, especially when you see that so much of the contingent of pro-Palestine activists today are Jewish people, secular and religious. We see them doing a lot of the direct actions around the country, saying, "Not in my name, never again." Never again means now. And so when you have Avi Meir, the editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post, writing op-eds about how you're no longer Jewish, recant your Judaism, denounce your Judaism because you are participating in these protests, that is the level of desperation from the Israeli government, that they're the ones who have conflated a beautiful, peaceful religion with a horrific settler colonial state that is based on ethnic cleansing. That's really unfortunate. And unfortunately, anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are on the rise. That's undeniable. But this is not what this is. And we see the punishment of actually Jewish activists on campus to try to ban some of these groups, because that's what it really is. Groups like the ADL, that's what it is. It's about protecting Israel. It's not about combating anti-Semitism. And it's grotesque because there is real anti-Semitism that needs to be combated.
Yeah. And again, you're no stranger to that issue, because a few years ago, we were writing about the protest of what had happened at a media literacy conference of all places around BDS issues, but boycott, divestment, sanction issues in Georgia. And you ended up at least partially winning a legal case, right, against the boycott issue. I wanted to just bring that up briefly because you have a history of dealing with this kind of bias and these kinds of charges of anti-Semitism.
100%. Yeah. I mean, they've put anti-BDS laws in over half the states in this country because they wanted to preemptively tamp down on the tide of justice that they know is inevitable. And it's undeniable that it's coming. Right. And that's why Israeli government officials, consulate officials have gone door to door for all of these state legislatures to try to lobby to put these laws in place. And the conflation of anti-Semitism with Palestinian liberation has scared a lot of people, as well as the heavy influence of the AIPAC lobby, because that's what politicians care about, is power and money. So when you dangle those things in front of politicians, it's not that hard to understand why they've all been scared into submission with this kind of cartoonish notion that chanting to the river to the sea means, whatever the hell the Israeli lobby wants to say it does, instead of just explicit calls for the freedom of oppressed people. It's outrageous, Mickey, when you see the detachment from the ruling class to the constituency of this country, when the overwhelming majority of both parties want a permanent ceasefire, and it's just completely not reflected. And that is why you see so many direct actions, so many protests, and this giant upswell of mobilizing, because there has to be dramatic actions, because no one is taking it seriously, and the media is not doing its job. So people are doing a lot to try to put this information out there and putting their bodies on the line, to try to do what's right and to move the needle.
Abby Martin, so before we move into some of the other things that you're working on, I want to at least give people an opportunity to hear about a couple of the other things that you've been working on before we end the segment here today. But let's go back to, of course, Gaza Fights for Freedom. Let's go back to what's happening with Israel-Palestine. And has there been any increase or spike in attention to your work or the film Gaza Fights for Freedom since mid-October?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, it seems like people are really revisiting it with eyes wide open, or with just inquisitive minds, because they maybe didn't know enough about the conflict. And what's interesting, Mickey, is that, there's no shortage of films on Palestine, but there is a severe shortage of films on Palestine that show the Palestinian perspective only, because there's a lot of tiptoeing around this issue. There's a lot of both sidesing, and there's a lot of false equivalencies. And so if you're putting a documentary together, typically you'll see trying to really gloss over the reality and the horrifying nature of the occupation and the siege on Gaza. And so you have a lot of obfuscation, I would say, of what the bare truth is. And so I've heard from many people who watch a lot of documentaries on this that Gaza Fights for Freedom, it's a great kind of activist tool to awaken people's minds about what is the Palestinian perspective and what's the Palestinian story. Because I worked with a group of journalists through the blockade. They filmed, I directed what we wanted in the interviews, but they filmed themselves the way that they want themselves to be portrayed. Because whenever you see films, there was also another documentary about the Great March of Return, and it showed Palestinians sitting in the dark shadows. And they picked extremists from a group of tens of thousands of people to portray the entire march as something that it was completely not. And it was a complete falsehood, and it was egregious. And so this documentary, it shows resilience. It shows the bravery, the courage. It has women on the front lines talking, Razan al-Najjar's story, her mother, a powerful figure in the documentary, just women's voices that you would never even understand that were so powerful and central to Gazan society. And another thing that I think the film really articulates well is that it's not just, not only did Hamas have nothing to do with the Great March of Return, but there's so many other political factions within Gaza. It's cartoonishly depicted as just, it's all Hamas run. And that's why you have people like Joe Biden actually not believing things that are coming out of Gaza, because he says, it's the Hamas run health ministry. Well, it's just the government. And they've never been called into question before when it's talking about death tolls or injuries. So why are we calling it into question now? If anything should be called into question, it's the Israeli government, the most distrustful, horrible propaganda operation. We can get into that. But so the film talks about that. It talks about the mosaic of political factions, how there's a lot of different groups there. It's not just Hamas. And when you look at the West Bank, Mickey, the West Bank, there is no governance of Hamas there. It's a collaborative entity, the PA, that is working hand in hand with the Israeli government. And that's just in one small sliver of the West Bank. The vast majority of the West Bank is under a police state military occupation where you cannot hold up a flag. There was one girl who was just released in the prisoner exchange that was in prison for 3 years because she posted a Palestinian flag on Facebook. These are the restrictions. These are the political restrictions that Palestinians are living under. 3 million living in the West Bank that cannot be proud of being Palestinian. They can't celebrate being Palestinian. In fact, the Israeli authorities, when they released those, the 100 or so, I forget how many prisoners that they already released, but the ones that they did release, they forbade any celebrations from their family, because they said that would be an incitement for terrorism. And they already executed one teenager for, I guess, celebrating too much. And they have sniped dead multiple Palestinians over the course of the last several days for doing nothing. I mean, there's video footage of just them standing out in front of their homes and being sniped dead, and then Israeli authorities won't let the ambulances reach their bodies. So even though they did release prisoners, and the vast majority of those were never charged, because Israel is the only country in the world that has military courts for children, and the children, they don't even go through like actual, it's rare to even go through like a military tribunal and be charged and convicted. And those are kangaroo courts. There's a 99% conviction rate. But the ones who weren't, they just languish in something called administrative detention, where you can renew it arbitrarily every 6 months. And you can just be in prison for years and years as a 5-year-old child for throwing a stone. And if you're convicted, you can actually be sent to prison for 20 years for the crime of throwing a stone. That's the kind of cruel, oppressive nature that we're talking about in the West Bank, where there's no Hamas, where the Israeli military has free reign to do what it wants. It's about humiliation and control.
So, yeah, so many points there that we could go from. One coming up too, and again, because of what your film Gaza Fights for Freedom shows, many people, particularly people that have steady diets of Western quote news media, which is very much propagandistic around issues in the Middle East and Israel. It's incredibly one-sided. There have been some cracks in that in the last month or so. There have been some of the major papers and major news outlets in the U.S. that are doing more coverage about what's happening to Palestinians than they certainly have historically. But since they were doing so little, that's not a lot, really. And it's certainly nowhere near the kind of coverage that the American public needs in order to understand the history, right? That's sort of all memory hold. There was a couple stories really quickly, just again, because this kind of examples that you give are, they're horrible examples, but we want people to understand that these aren't just constructs of Hamas propaganda. These are things that are happening to people. The story that Electronic Intifada had was pretty riveting, on the children's chorus or children singing about Israel, annihilating everyone in Gaza. It kind of dovetails with the quote you rattled off earlier about some of the more genocidal kind of quotes that we're hearing. I mean, granted, I'm not going to pretend that everybody living in a country has those ideas and shares them. But I mean, the fact that these things are making their way around, and we're seeing high-level government officials, of course, say these incredibly awful things, insightful things. What do you think we might do as journalists here to really get people to understand these complex? Again, I'm using the word complex in a different way per se. Not that if you look at the issue, you should be able to figure it out. I'm talking about the complexity of people being steeped in so many decades of certain narratives that anything that looks different is suspicious to them. And that's not wildly unreasonable. But how do we then break that down? How do we talk to the very people that we need to in order to get them to understand where they might be misinformed seriously about these issues?
Well, I mean, I was awakened to the kind of like how deep Israeli propaganda goes, just as someone who's studied propaganda for 15 years, and I've studied deep state propaganda, the way that the US empire kind of deploys propaganda around the world to paint its enemies and allies a certain way, and Israeli propaganda was folded into that. And I remember the Gaza flotilla was what really woke me up to like, oh, this is really egregious and really interesting, that you have US corporate media across the board just playing like IDF delivered videos showing that they were actually justified in exterminating a lot of people that were just peace activists bringing aid to Gaza on a ship in international waters. Israeli commandos come down on the ship and just execute several people, and then they painted those people on the ship trying to fend off the Israeli commandos that they just saw assassinate their friends with tables and chairs, and they circled them saying like these were weapons. And I remember looking at that footage in 2010, and I was like, this is very bizarre. And so ever since then, I've really paid careful attention to how this all operates, Mickey. And it's done really insidiously. I mean,
Very
whether
much
it's the
so.
passive voice, like, for example, the prisoner exchange. You look at something as simple as saying Israeli children, right? Israeli children are held hostage. Horrible. All the hostages should come home, of course. And then it said people aged 17 and under on the Palestinian side. And it was like, wait, are those not children, or are they also children? So it's so insidious. You might just skip over it if you didn't kind of take a double look
Right.
at it. You're
As if they
thinking, oh my
can't go see
God.
your R-rated movie.
Right. Or for example, the Committee to Protect Journalists and Reporters Without Borders, they published a report saying, yes, Israel is deliberately targeting and killing journalists. They are trying to appeal to the ICC or whatever, deliver an official criminal complaint. The Washington Post actually ran that report. And in the tweet behind a paywalled article, it didn't even mention who was killing the journalists. It just said this journalist, yes, was according to this organization, they were targeted. It's like, by who? Name names. What are you talking about? So it's that kind of stuff. It's very passive, and it doesn't want to name what the entity is that's killing the journalists, who's doing this. And Mickey, I think the most egregious example that was the most offensive to me, it's the playbook to overcomplicate something with the cartoonish kind of depraved level of Hasbro that they deploy, which is the Ali Arab hospital bombing. The hospital that was the largest death toll in any Israeli attack in Palestinian history, which was the 500 people that were massacred by the Israeli airstrike at the Ali Arab hospital. And so because international outrage was mounting after we understood the death toll, they immediately blamed it on an errant missile from Islamic Jihad. And without going into the overwhelming amount of evidence that actually shows that it was Israel, everyone just started talking about, oh, who really did it? Was it Islamic Jihad? So it was basically to overcomplicate it, to make it seem like Palestinians have the capacity to kill that many people, which in the history of fog of war. Well, they're just killing each other, Mickey. So I guess we really can't know what's going on the ground. And then what does Israel do? Because they just can't help themselves. They released a doctored audio recording of Islamic Jihad militants speaking to each other, which was proven to be fake by Channel 4. So my question is, look, they could have probably gotten away with completely pretending like this was an errant missile because of the acquiescent Western press just running with these claims, but they couldn't stop themselves. So just like the Flotilla massacre, when they released the doctored audio recording pretending like the people on the ship were anti-Semitic and they deserved to be executed, which was proven to be fake, they did the same thing here. So it doesn't matter what other evidence exists. Why would they produce doctored audio recordings that are fake if they're in the right, if it really was an errant missile? So this just shows you the playbook. It's the same with the Al-Shifa hospital, releasing these giant 3D renderings that look like the Tora Bora complex of Osama bin Laden. When Donald Rumsfeld unfurled on Tim Russert's show the giant map of Osama bin Laden's fortress, it was really harkened back to that. Yeah, it really harkened back to that, because I was like, oh, Netanyahu himself, they're releasing this giant CGI rendering trying to preemptively justify why they're going to invade and bomb a hospital. So
sorry, not photos, artistic renderings were
not photos, Mickey. It was
drawings.
It was a cartoon.
Well, again, past is prologue. Perhaps you and I aren't surprised that there's this extraordinary level of effort that goes into controlling narratives and producing propaganda. But it is the case that this is also something that's very hard to convince other people, because one of the things that you have to do first is try to convince them that you're not part of the propaganda campaign. Because again, it's too easy to say, well, you have that argument, you're clearly with them. I mean, again, it wasn't just the Biden himself, but his whole administration going to the Secretary of State and Blinken, where it was painful to even watch. It was amazing to see the White House, the sort of Washington press corps, like people from CNN, like James Acosta. It looked almost painful to him to have to ask people like Blinken, like, dude, we know that there's a bunch of people that are dead. Like, you can't even deny it. So what's the deal with the Hamas said so, and it's not true if Hamas said so? I mean, watching even that exchange was bizarre, because the U.S. lapdog press is often like right there, right? They're right there feeding the softballs and going along with the narrative. But this has gone so off the rails that they're having to acknowledge things that historically they weren't pushed to acknowledge, per se. And so that in and of itself, to me, is telling of something. that if even these other groups that have historically been in lock, stock, and barrel for all of this propaganda, and they've been happily producing it, the fact that there's cracks in it suggests that there's some possible shift. And so I know our segment's out of time, but I would at least like to hear if you have a few thoughts on the possibilities of that shift and widening some of those cracks in public perception in order to get people to see more clearly what's happening and stop so much carnage and so much tragedy.
It is true. It is true that organizations like the CNN, which I mean, look, I can't even stomach watching them, but I do see inklings of truth coming out on social media, and it does give me hope. I mean, at least a glimmer of it, because even CNN, you know, they're all embedded with the IDF, and every package that they run, they have to say this was all pre-approved by the IDF, otherwise we wouldn't be able to run it. And when the Al-Shifa hospital was raided, and when Israeli soldiers invaded a hospital and tried to, they basically sniping dead people in the ICU units, and then just made all the patients flee, or else they told us that there would be this huge command center and that it justified everything that was going on. And even CNN had to admit that the weapons looked like they were staged in part. And even you had CNN journalists asking, hey, this tile looks like it's actually from the hospital. Like, is this the tunnel system that you were talking about? Like, it's almost the incredulity of like even journalists themselves knowing that it's all BS. Like, they are actually being lied to real time. I mean, there might again be some deep-seated denial and fear, the fact that they know peripherally that Israel is just like killing journalists like with impunity. So I think that that does play a role, especially when you're like with the IDF. Like, you, in a way, you know that they could get away with it, that they kill you too. But at the same time, you do see the cracks coming through, and you do see these people kind of inquisitively, like Christine Amanpour interviewing the former Israeli prime minister. And he was like, well, we actually built the bunker under the Al-Shifa hospital back in the 90s. And she was like, wait, repeat that. You guys built the bunker? So it's like, it's like Israeli officials don't try to, you know, they don't try to hide the nature of what they're doing. It's the American journalists that are trying to like twist themselves in knots with the mental gymnastics to try to apologize for them. So when you have Israeli officials sometimes slip and say something that they didn't really mean to say to an American audience, it's amazing to see those moments. But I think, Mickey, I think the bigger thing is, what can people do? You know, Gen Z and millennials, you see that this huge shift going on, the consciousness is shifting completely, and the distrust of corporate media is completely severed. I mean, there's no trust whatsoever in the institutional media or the political establishment. And I think that that's where the hope lies, is youth in this country. And we've seen the media lie us into war for the last, you know, forever, but it's gotten so bad, and that's kind of become a meme where it's like media lies us into war since Iraq and today. So why would they tell the truth today? And that's what we just have to keep telling ourselves. Usually when there's uniformity in the corporate media, this subsidized by defense contractors, usually the truth somewhere is on the other side, right? And so it's up to us to follow those independent media organizations like Electronic Intifada, like Mondoweiss, like journalists like David Sheen, who live within Israel and are translating real time the racist media fervor and incitement in Israeli media. It's up to us. We have to become media literate and seek out these sources, because that's all we can do. I think that there is no hope within the corporate media apparatus. Yeah, it's great that some truth is getting out, but that's not, we can't depend on the morality or the credibility of them to do their jobs, because we know what their purpose is and who they serve, and they serve the ruling class, and they're just an appendage of the ruling class. So that's where our job comes in, right, Mickey? That's where our job comes in as independent grassroots journalists who have to tell the perspective of the Palestinians. But with the advent of social media, they've been doing a pretty good job. And you know, they're filming their most vulnerable moments for us, so we can see the horrors unfolding. Because when our government sits up there and has the audacity to tell us that this isn't true, they have to show their dead children to the camera and say, look, this is what's happening. And how sick is that? How depraved is that they have to do that? They can't even bury their dead in peace and quiet. They have to show the world, because we have our government saying, we don't believe you. So it's up to us, Mickey, and people are waking up every day. Although I have to say, in the words of my friend who is a refugee from Gaza, he said, look, it does give me hope that people are waking up. And there's so many tens of millions of people on the street. He said, but by the time enough people wake up to stop this, all Palestinians will be dead. And that it's sad because it's happening so slowly that there has to be a massacre of this magnitude for such a swell of consciousness to spread. I just want it to end. I just want the violence to end. It's non-negotiable. These people need human rights, and the violence will continue and continue and continue. And the tinderbox is just going to be sparked again and again, Mickey, if we deny people basic human rights.
Absolutely. That's independent journalist Abby Martin, head of the Empire Files, host there, also Media Roots, filmmaker of Gaza Fights for Freedom, and forthcoming, your latest documentary is going to be Earth's Greatest Enemy. And just really quickly to tease people, this is going to be an amazing film. I know what it's about, and it's a very important subject, and it's no surprise that you're tackling it because most others won't. What is Earth's greatest enemy, Abby Martin?
Earth's greatest enemy is the system of U.S. imperialism, and more specifically, the U.S. military. It has 1,000 bases around the world. Every base is a dumping ground that completely pollutes the ecosystem and poisons the local communities. It's happening here. It's happening abroad with complete impunity. This goes beyond just, of course, what happens with direct warfare. It's everything, Mickey. And the U.S. military needs to be reined in, and it needs to be held accountable for its crimes against the earth. And, even these global climate conferences every year, the U.S. military is completely excluded, and it's a complete farce. So until we address the elephant in the room, we cannot tackle the environmental problems that we face.
Indeed. And I'm reminded of the late, great folk icon, Utah Phillips, who once quipped that the earth isn't dying, it's being killed, and the people doing it have names and addresses. And some of them, fall well under the umbrella of the military industrial complex. Abby Martin, people can find your work at theempirefiles.tv. Anything else you'd like to share with our audience so people who do not know already, maybe they should, but if they don't, where can they follow your work? Where can they find the important things that you are doing?
I'm on social media, FabAbs on Instagram, at Abby Martin on Twitter. Check out our channel, Empire Files on YouTube, Media Roots Radio on all podcast platforms. And please check out GazaFightsForFreedom.com, Earth'sGreatestEnemy.com. Mickey, it's always a pleasure. Can't wait to come back on. Thank you so much for everything you and Project Censored do.
Back at you, Abby Martin. It's always an honor to have you. Thank you so much for the important work that you're doing. And we'll certainly be having you back on earlier next year, and we'll be talking about Earth's Greatest Enemy. Thanks for joining us.